Gabby Petito's story was one of the hottest media topics in 2021. A beautiful and vibrant young woman who was an aspiring content creator in the ever-growing category of van life travel vlogging. For those who don't know, van life is a movement that has gained popularity in recent years, particularly with the younger Gen Z and millennial generations. The idea is you purchase a van and remodel the interior to be closer to a mobile home. Then you spend most of your time on the road traveling around the country and seeing the sights America has to offer, only stopping to shower and eat when needed. It is easy to see the allure of it to many of the younger generations, as their prospects for the typical American dream of being a homeowner have greatly diminished. Not to mention the freedom such a lifestyle provides, where all one needs to be concerned with is buying gas and keeping up on the vehicle. For a young couple without children or any other responsibilities, this can seem like a phenomenal escape. Tragically, though, in Gabby's case, this dream would unexpectedly turn deadly. Gabby Petito was born in New York on March 19, 1999. Her parents described her as an upbeat child who was always willing to pursue her dreams and wouldn't let anything stand in her way. In high school, she met a young man named Brian Laundrie, and the two hit it off immediately. Both of them had a very carefree, hippie-like approach to life, and seemed like a perfect fit for one another. They soon began dating, and while on the surface they seemed to be a very loving and happy couple, there were signs early on that their relationship was much more volatile than it appeared. Friends of both stated the couple was very unstable, with the two being all over each other and madly in love one second, then almost immediately turning hostile toward each other and having explosive public fights that made hanging out with them very awkward. And sometimes that's the way things go with these type of relationships in our younger years. I'm sure we all know one couple from our high school days that was like this, or even was in a relationship like this. This instability caused the high school sweethearts to break up during their final years, and after graduating, Gabby moved to South Carolina, with Brian and his family moving to Florida. Miss Petito worked as a hostess at a restaurant in Wilmington, but wasn't content with the 40-hour workweek a normal job confided her to. She had bigger dreams and wanted to become an online content creator, sharing her love of travel with the world. In her late teens still, there was plenty of time for her to find herself, and her family fully supported her endeavor. Soon after, she and Brian reconnected and began dating again in 2019, with Gabby moving in with him and his parents down in Florida. The volatility that defined their relationship in high school seemed to have subsided, at least on the surface, and Brian was fully committed to supporting Gabby's dreams. The two took jobs near Brian's house and saved up their money to embark on a cross-country trip in late 2019 to early 2020. And looking at Gabby and Brian's Instagram accounts, it seems like this trip was an incredibly happy time for the young couple. They drove from New York to California in Brian's Nissan Sentra and made stops along the way in Georgia, Colorado, and several other places, culminating in the two getting engaged just a couple months after Gabby's 21st birthday in July of 2020. They returned home in late summer and were so impacted by the experience of their trip, they quickly began planning their next one. Gabby would continue to work on her social media presence, trying to make a name for herself in the van life vlogging sphere, with the couple purchasing a van of their own to use on their next trip. The vehicle was a 2012 Ford Transit Connect that they purchased in December of 2020, and quickly began customizing for their trip the following year. Realizing they would need a considerable amount of money for both the van modification and to fund their trip, they both got jobs, with Gabby working 50 hours a week at a local Taco Bell and Brian working full-time at an organic juice bar. They undertook an extensive remodeling project of the van that took several months, but eventually transformed it into a cozy living space. After months of working and saving their money, the two departed on their trip in July of 2021 after visiting Gabby's parents to celebrate her younger brother's high school graduation. The two departed New York the following day, wide-eyed and hopeful at the future which lay before them, with their family and friends celebrating them following their dreams. Unbeknownst to anyone at the time, though, this trip would end in a life-altering tragedy for both families. The start of Brian and Gabby's journey was by all accounts great. Based on both of their social media profiles as well as a video Gabby launched on her new YouTube channel to document the first portions of their trip. Pictures and videos show the two laughing and enjoying themselves with what seemed to be not a care in the world. However, like many things on social media, things weren't as pleasant as they seemed on the outside. On August 12, 2021, officers in Moab, Utah were called to the scene of a domestic disturbance near Arches National Park. Reportedly, witnesses saw a couple in a white van arguing with one another. They said that the male had been pushing the woman away from the vehicle, and the two began striking one another, with the man not letting the woman inside of the van and attempting to leave the scene several times before eventually letting her back in and the two driving off. Officers were dispatched to the scene and soon after found the van in question and pulled it over, with the couple inside being Gabby Petito and Brian Laundrie. Gabby was very clearly upset and had marks on her arms, with Brian also having marks on his face but trying to play things off more calmly. It was clear the two had been involved in some sort of scuffle, and officers immediately separated them to get their statements on what exactly had taken place. Gabby and Brian both admitted they had gotten into a fight earlier that morning while Petito was cleaning out the van, and that argument lingered on into the day as they began driving. It was then the two stopped near a rest stop and their fight continued outside of the van, which was where the witness saw them and called 911. Gabby admitted to striking Brian multiple times and said the marks on her came from his attempts to restrain her. Brian corroborated this statement, saying that he pushed Gabby in an attempt to get her away from him. After about an hour of speaking with police, officers elected not to arrest either Laundrie or Petito, but did separate them for the night, taking Brian to a local hotel. Their approach in the stop was widely criticized in the aftermath of what was to come. They had failed to contact the witness who initially placed the 911 call, or to photograph the injuries that Gabby and Brian had sustained. Furthermore, in the official report, police cited the incident as a, quote, mental health crisis as opposed to domestic violence, which would have required an arrest to be made. Despite this, none of the officers attempted to get the two into contact with a mental health counselor, which is standard procedure in such cases. A review of the stop conducted later in the year determined that the officers should have placed Petito under arrest after she admitted to striking Laundrie. Unfortunately, this is a situation where hindsight is 20/20. Watching the body cam footage, it's pretty clear the responding officers just felt bad for the couple and wanted to try and give them some leeway. With so many incidents in recent years of officers being accused of overuse of force, it's kind of a shame that in this instance, it seems their response might not have been forceful enough. On August 17th, Laundrie flew back to his home in Florida to get some items out of a storage unit the couple shared. And here is where the timeline of events starts to get a bit murky. Gabby spent the next week at a Fairfield motel near Salt Lake City, Utah, and checked out on August 24th, meeting back up with Brian as his flight returned. The next day, Gabby called and spoke to her mother, as she often did during her trips, and said that she and Brian were headed for Wyoming. Later that night, she uploaded what would be her last photo to her Instagram page. On August 27th, the two were spotted at a restaurant in Jackson, Wyoming called the Merry Piglets. Here, several witnesses, including people who worked at the restaurant, said the two got into an explosive argument, and when asked to leave, Brian stormed out, cursing at the restaurant staff. Not long after, a tearful Petito returned and apologized to them for the incident before leaving again. This would be the last time she was ever seen alive. Later that night around 6 p.m., a family vacationing at nearby Spread Creek dispersed camping grounds caught Brian and Gabby's van on video while driving through the campgrounds. It would take a month, though, for the significance of this footage to be realized. Over the next several days, Gabby's family became worried when they stopped getting phone calls from her, as she was usually very strict about keeping in contact with them. For the rest of the month, all they received was vague text messages, and when attempting to call her would get a text response saying the phone didn't have service. On August 29th, a couple picked up Brian at Grand Teton National Park, where they chatted for a bit, and Brian told them about Gabby's van life channel and Instagram account. According to them, Mr. Laundrie said that he was camping by himself at the park, while Miss Petito worked on her social media pages from their van. Abruptly, though, when Brian found out they were headed for the nearby town of Jackson, Wyoming, he asked them to drop him off at an entrance to a campground and thanked them for the ride. He told them he would look for a ride from someone else, but seemed to disappear out of sight almost immediately. Then, in a stunning turn of events on September 1st, 2021, Brian Laundrie returned to his parents' home in Florida, alone. Gabby's family reached out to Brian to see where she was, but received no response. And it didn't appear as though Laundrie's family was putting any pressure on him to help. In fact, them and Brian proceeded to go on a 2-day camping trip on September 6th and 7th of 2021, basically pretending this whole business about their son's missing fiancé would just blow over. On September 11th, Gabby's family filed a missing person report with Long Island police. Police in North Point, Florida were immediately contacted, and news reports on the disappearance began popping up on mainstream networks. Almost overnight, the case became something of a media sensation, and everyone from Good Morning America to true crime YouTubers seemed to hop on the train overnight offering their takes on the missing persons case. For Brian's part, he and his family were being completely silent per their lawyer's recommendation. North Point police were amping up the public pressure, accusing Brian of stonewalling them and saying his lack of cooperation only made him seem more suspicious. By this point, basically everyone who was weighing in on the case had come to the conclusion that Brian was likely responsible for whatever had happened to his fiancée. The only problem was, without evidence a crime had taken place, police weren't ready to make an arrest. They were, however, piecing together a timeline of events with the help of witnesses such as the couple who had spotted Brian and Gabby's van, as well as the couple who'd given Laundrie a ride just before he returned home to Florida. Then, on September 17th, Brian's family shockingly filed a missing persons report on him, claiming they hadn't seen their son since September 13th. This was extremely surprising, as police and news networks had been camped out in front of the Laundrie home and couldn't believe he had somehow slipped past them. This prompted a wave of speculation online and in the news, as many felt that his family likely realized their son was going to be arrested and helped him flee to avoid justice. Almost overnight, a massive search was undertaken that involved dozens of police officers as well as the FBI. As all of this was happening, the search for Gabby was continuing hundreds of miles away in Wyoming, where police believed they had narrowed down a search area thanks to the help of several witnesses. On September 19, 2021, the Petito family's worst fears were realized. Gabby's remains were found at the Spread Creek dispersed camping grounds, not far from where their van had been caught on tape just a few weeks prior. A month later, a coroner report determined she had been murdered via blunt force trauma to the head and neck, as well as strangulation. The coroner also determined she had been dead for several weeks, meaning that the video of their van was likely recorded around the time Gabby was murdered. Police named Brian Laundrie as their prime suspect and an arrest warrant was issued. The case then exploded into a full-blown media circus, with everyone seeming to have an opinion on where Laundrie had fled. Even renowned sleuth dog The Bounty Hunter stepped up to the plate, claiming that he would find Brian. The circus around this case and the amount of speculation that was going on with it in both mainstream media and on social media is frankly the primary reason we avoided talking about it last year while things were unfolding. When we report our stories, we pride ourselves on giving factual details, not wild speculation or unconfirmed theories. And if doing so costs us views for not chasing trends, then so be it. Days after Gabby's body was found, the body cam footage from police in Moab was made public, and it was announced that the officer's response would be investigated. As I said earlier, much of the public felt that police had been too lenient on the couple and should have recognized a potentially dangerous situation was brewing, then taken further steps to keep Petito and Laundrie away from one another, even if it meant arresting Gabby. It was also around this time that the eyewitness reports from the incident in Jackson became public, making Brian's guilt a foregone conclusion for many following the case. All that remained was to find Laundrie and make him have his day in court. Unfortunately, that would never come to pass. On October 20th, 2021, police recovered skeletal remains in the Myakahatchee Creek Environmental Park, just a few miles from the Laundrie home in North Point. The remains were later identified as belonging to Brian Laundrie. Initially, his cause of death could not be determined, but upon further examination by an anthropologist, it was determined Brian had died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. Among his belongings was a journal which contained a lengthy confession where he admitted to murdering his fiancé, then texting her family from her phone afterwards to try and avoid them reporting her missing. Authorities officially placed the blame on him for Gabby's death, and the case was soon closed. Though this wasn't the end of the legal battles. Petito's family was firmly convinced that Laundrie's family had assisted their son in evading authorities, and filed a civil suit against them in March of this year. As of the making of this video, the most recent update on the civil suit states that guilt will be determined via a jury and not just a single judge. The Laundrie family attorney has attempted to have the suit dismissed, but the motions so far have been rejected. Whatever the result of the civil trial turns out to be, we will update you with a pinned comment below. But for now, barring some sort of total bombshell piece of evidence, the criminal case appears to be closed. All around, this story is just a complete and utter tragedy. Gabby was just really starting her life and was working hard to make her dream of earning a living through social media and YouTube come true. Whether or not she would ultimately have made it work, I can't help but commend someone for their willingness to get out there and take a shot at their dream, only to tragically have that dream and her life taken from her by the last person she probably expected. This is Crime Spot, and thank you for watching.